So book passage to the secret world of cruise ships.
Welcome aboard.
They're the ocean-bound retreats that promise to take their guests to paradise.
There's something about being cut off from land and being out in this totally different environment. Women become a little bit more glamorous, men become a little bit more charming.
You're out there in the middle of the ocean, the stars are there, the wind is blowing, I mean, it's breathtaking.
You are totally free of all responsibility. It's a play world, it's a dream world, it's not the real world.
From the sparkling new megaliners,
Grand Princess is now secure for sea and ready to sail.
to the scaled-down fun ships. It's high tide for the cruising industry, a $6 billion business that just keeps getting bigger.
Right now, there are about 130 ships in the cruise business. That's going to grow even further. There are 36 new liners being built, with more being designed.
Efficiency experts need look no further than the dock of a cruise liner to see what a well-run business looks like.
Is that okay? That one.
Less than an hour ago, some 1,800 passengers ended their voyage on this ship. Within minutes of their departure, crew members began preparing for the next boatload. The ship will sail again, freshly stocked with supplies and passengers, just 7 hours after its arrival in port. Filling the huge vessel with enough fuel for a 7-day journey takes 4 hours at a cost of more than $200,000.
670,000 US gallons. That's our full capacity. The fuel we picked up yesterday, the price worked out to roughly about 30 cents a gallon.
The ship is also being loaded with a staggering amount of food. 10,000 pounds each of fruit and vegetables, 3 tons of chicken, 5 tons of meat, 16 tons of fish, and nearly 100,000 bottles of alcohol. More than a dozen industrial-sized refrigerators are needed to store it all. The only item the ship doesn't need is fresh water.
We are totally self-sufficient with our potable water, drinking water, shower water, and that sort of stuff. We bring in seawater, and as we boil the water off, we catch the condensation and then cool that, and that is then pure, clean water.
3 evaporators produce more than 300 gallons of water per minute, enough for drinking, showers, and pools, with plenty left over for the kitchen and laundry facilities.
All right, my name's Mike. I'm one of the dive instructors here on board.
A 1,000-person crew is needed around the clock to keep the giant vessel running smoothly.
Cabin attendants.
The trickiest coordination of employees takes place in the galley, where exacting precision is needed to simultaneously keep more than 2,000 stomachs full and thousands of dirty dishes clean. For maximum efficiency, each employee is assigned a specific task. Cooks clean and chop vegetables. Others prepare the main course. In assembly line fashion, the meals are arranged and delivered to the dining room. And before passengers even finish their entrees, an army of workers is busy dealing with dessert. These hard-working crew members don't exactly live the high life on a cruise line, often living in tiny quarters for months on end.
The crew cabins are much smaller, of course, than the passenger cabins. The space that gives you revenue is the space that is occupied by the passengers. So the more space you can give to the passengers, the more revenue.
Crew accommodations are Spartan, but free. Employees have no expenses on board, but the deal isn't as generous as it sounds. Salaries for crew members in service positions are notoriously low.
Cruise ships today tend to have a very international workforce, but they do tend to get inexpensive labor from developing countries.
When you go home to Costa Rica, it looks like a lot of money. But to you and I, we might be horrified with the weekly wages of that waiter.
There is no minimum wage, no overtime, and benefits can be hard to come by.
The cabin stewards earn more money than they could earn, if they were in their home country, but it's a great experience for them.
Gavin MacLeod had many great experiences as Captain Stubing on the internationally successful TV program The Love Boat.
I loved cruising. I loved the people who were involved. And it brought cruising into people's minds, into their lives, into their vacation periods. And the cruising industry was just basically for the affluent. And then because of the television, the show The Love Boat, everybody started to get turned on.
And on The Love Boat, one of the most visible crew members was the cruise director, perky matchmaker Julie McCoy.
I don't think we're quite as maybe pushy as she was with the romance. I mean, she'd slip room keys and everything, so Julie was a little more forward with that.
Cruise directors keep passengers busy with carefully contrived activities and poolside games.
Everything from trivia contests to jigsaw puzzle contests to scavenger hunts, karaoke, bingo, horse racing, country line dancing, ballroom dancing, napkin folding, everything.
This constant social interaction can sometimes cause guests to feel a little too comfortable with cruise directors.
They actually find out where you live in some cases, and it's not uncommon for them to knock at your door in the middle of the night and want you to solve a problem, whether it be a marital problem, whether it be plumbing in their cabin suddenly goes awry.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is from the bridge, the captain speaking.
For those kinds of issues, it may just be best to go straight to the top. The ship's captain is ultimately responsible for everything that happens on board.
Hello, JP. Just to let you know, we're ready to let go the lines.
At the beginning, very few recognize you being the captain, and which is normal. Sometimes I've been recognized as a waiter or whatever. What I like to do every morning is just an hour walk around the ship, the open decks, make sure they are all ready for passengers when they start waking up, and go sunbathing.
Back on the bridge, Captain Romano charts his routes on navigational maps. Radar, sonar, and precise computer-generated graphics help keep the vessel on course.
Now the ships are becoming more and more like aeroplane cockpit. Everything is put together, so from one position you can actually con the ship without moving all around, which is much more efficient.
Despite high-tech navigational advances, crew members still rely on the power of binoculars to keep the ship out of harm's way.
It'd be appreciated if you're doing a couple, and then but after doing 2 full flushes through, we can then fill it up for tonight and then day ballasts before arrival.
I do have a team of officers, which they work on shifts on the bridge 24 hours a day, and they drive, steer the ship when I'm not up there.
With one fluid turn of the thruster, 100-plus ton vessels can be steered effortlessly across the ocean. But as majestic as they may appear on the surface, cruise lines can leave some ugly scars in their wake.
It's very, very important that we keep the areas that we cruise to and the waters that we cruise on safe and clean and attractive for all of our guests and employees. We have a very enviable track record in terms of safety and the environment.
Still, boatloads of tourists can overwhelm these small exotic ports.
Overcrowding is, in my opinion, one of the situations which needs to be addressed, quite quickly. It's not uncommon for the population of 14,000 passengers arriving in an island on one day to exceed the population of an island. There's a race to see which island can grow as quickly as possible, because the cruise ships have a tremendous positive effect on the economics of the particular destination.
But economic gain may not be enough to compensate for ecological damage. Illegal trash dumping is one of the industry's most common infractions, despite the fact that all ships are equipped to manage the garbage they generate.
We have 2 incinerators that burn all the combustibles. Cans we compact so that they're easy to handle, and we store, and then we offload them at our turnaround port. We have so much glass, all the wine and what have you that's consumed on board, that we actually crush that. Roughly about a ton of glass a week, and about 2 tons each of aluminium and steel.
Leaking oil is a particularly troubling problem that can permanently damage the ecology. But close monitoring by the Coast Guard at U.S. ports and the tough punishments they levy help guarantee that careless cruise lines will pay the price.
Just recently, one of them was fined not only $9 million for illegal dumping, they have also been indicted with a criminal indictment because they apparently provided false oil records to the Coast Guard.
Cruise lines have recently been host to a couple of serious health problems as well. In 1994, 1,200 passengers had to be evacuated from one ship after swimming pools were found to be the source of Legionnaire's disease. That same year, another liner was forced to cut its journey short when more than 500 people became ill from spoiled food.
On a ship with a contained environment, you know right away if there's any difficulty. So we want to make sure we don't have those difficulties through preventive action in the first place.
Fortunately, in the last decade, only 4 passengers have been killed while traveling on a cruise line. All of them on the Achille Lauro, which sank off the coast of Somalia in 1995. Compare those statistics to major airline safety records, and cruise experts say you'll see how their commitment to safety pays off.
There have been some incidents in recent years where cruise ships have caught fire or run aground or hit coral reefs. In every one of those instances, the good news is that all the safety measures worked. No one was killed or seriously injured in any of those incidents. In fact, no passenger has lost their life aboard a cruise ship in such an incident for at least 20 years.
Liners are attracting a record number of cruising passengers, more than 5 million a year.
I can relax and keep busy, so it's kind of best of both worlds for us.
Yet it's no longer about where you're going, but how you get there. And building the biggest and the best is no easy feat.
The new ships have new features to relate to today's customer, and they want more choice. They want dining options, they want entertainment options, they want activities that are have a lot of variety. It's about choice, and cruising certainly offers that.
Oh, my excitement now. It's getting too much. Is one move on number 2 is Wendy's Whirlwind. Number 3 is McDonald's Mare. And number 6 on the outside is the Palomino Pizza.
The cruise ship itself is the destination, especially with the new ships that have so many activities. The more you cruise, the more you realize that, in a way, the ports are the least important part of it.
The big difference in taking a cruise, I think, is the ship you choose and the line you choose, rather than where it goes, because it's the life on board ship that really counts.
And that onboard life is getting more opulent and costly all the time. The price tag to build the Grand Princess, the largest and most expensive cruise ship to date, is a whopping $450 million.
You look up and you see a structure that looks mammoth in size. I mean, you feel like an ant. But that feeling is completely taken away when you board the ship, because on board you feel as if you're in a very intimate, luxurious environment.
Facing the after the ship, 517 is about halfway down to the back. Great.
The Grand Princess is furnished with 1,300 staterooms. Cruise lines don't like to think of these accommodations as cabins. They'd prefer to think of them as luxury hotel suites.
They didn't want you to know that you were on the ship, really. So they made it look like, well, I'm back in the hotel, you know?
A hotel which is 5 times larger than the average Hilton. For travelers who'd rather not get away from it all with 2,600 other vacationers, there's always the option of taking a smaller ship. Crystal Cruises limits their number of guests to around 500. 500 very pampered guests.
They treat you like royalty. You don't get that kind of service anywhere in the world. We do better than the King of England, I think, when we're on the ship.
The royal treatment, which includes gourmet meals from world-famous chefs, also comes with an imperial price tag.
At the higher end of the scale, you can pay as much as $2,000 a day per person and more.
No matter what the cost of the cruise or the size of the ship, designers are always struggling to create the perfect space for each guest.
Probably the greatest misconception of cruising is that you feel closed in on a cruise ship. I think that a lot of people are worried that if you go on a cruise, you're going to feel like you're just in your room or the ship is so small.
Wow. Oh, here's your TV you wanted. Beautiful.
Space is always at a premium on board. Cramped quarters are made to appear open and generous by using mirrors and manipulating scale.
You decrease the height of the chair, for example, make the sofa lower, smaller. I mean, if you have a huge chair, you feel very small, right? If you have a very tiny little chair, you feel larger.
Cruise ship architects are responsible for each and every detail on the ship, from the liner's shape down to the uniforms worn by the crew.
I enjoy seeing the result of the struggle through the years. When you work on the ship for 4 years and you do all these designs down to the details, you know, skirtings, even cufflinks, it's so nice to see it done, you know.
No matter what form the final product takes, luxury liner, adventure cruiser, or a so-called fun ship, the initial planning stage always involves the same thing. Lots of blueprints, as was the case with the Disney Magic, an 83,000-ton liner launched in 1998.
For a ship like the Disney ship, I would just guess 600-700 architectural drawings, at least.
Once the final design's been approved and the raw materials have arrived at the boatyard, assembly begins immediately, starting from the ground up.
They build them in blocks and put them together like you will do with the Lego, yeah? And even they can build them like towers. You know, you can build them like a skyscraper.
In addition to the ship's architect, the captain, the chief engineer, and the safety officer will monitor the construction from beginning to end. Every facet of the design and construction must adhere to strict safety guidelines known as SOLAS.
SOLAS is safety of life at sea, and this is a standard that all merchant ships and cruise ships have to conform to allow us to sail safely, so that there's a set standard throughout the world.
From the engines to the lifeboats to the kitchen, these standards, safety of life at sea, cover it all.
Today's cruise ships are amazingly safe. The new technologies that are built into today's cruise ships are just outstanding.
Whatever we have in the Grand Princess, we've tripled it in some instances. Machinery spaces themselves, the engine room, we actually have 2 engine rooms. The idea being if we suffer a disaster and we lose one engine room, it gets flooded or whatever, we can still maintain power for the ship, we can still drive using the other engine room.
Every backup system is checked and rechecked in the boatyard. So when a real emergency strikes, there are no surprises.
The lifeboats and tenders, for example, I was involved in the boatyard where they were all built. I oversaw the final construction of them. I was involved in the testing of them. We overload them. We run them at full speed for hours on end to really put them through their paces.
We simulated a casualty with one of the fire team. They removed the casualty from the space with no problem, regrouped and re-entered with a new team and put out the fire.
And when they're complete, these self-proclaimed mini-cities make the promises of fantasy float into reality.
One final note, after removing your life jacket, be very careful not to let the long security belt drag on the deck.
The cruise industry is on a roll. Business has been increasing at an impressive rate of 11% a year.
There's no end to the dimensions. It's phenomenal how it's growing and taking off.
And despite popular perception, many of these recent cruise converts are not wealthy old folks.
Do you want to book babysitting for the other nights, or will it be just a single night? Or are you gonna...
The average age today is 49, and that keeps going down. Cruising passengers keep getting younger and younger, and about 60% of today's cruisers earn less than $60,000 a year.
Hi, how you doing? Deck 6, straight ahead and to the right.
Industry watchers say there are 3 key reasons cruise lines are becoming more popular among the not-so-rich and famous.
They offer good value, they offer convenience, and they offer a touch of romance.
Thanks to the movies, the romantic possibilities of an ocean voyage are firmly entrenched in popular culture. Besides, there are always plenty of newlyweds on board to keep the torch lit in the name of love.
Cheers. Cheers to our honeymoon. Last night of our honeymoon.
Even without the honeymoon, today's sleek new ships provide much to cherish. Yet when a cruise is inspected closely, the real secrets rise to the surface. Although an all-inclusive $1,000 week may sound like a hot deal, additional expenses and inconveniences can cool it off considerably.
All right, and surf rate, turn your head slightly this way. That's perfect. Ready, 1, 2, and a 3.
Cruise lines boost their profits by getting passengers to spend money over and above their fare. It's a practice insiders call increasing onboard revenue. One of the biggest money makers for a ship is its casino.
We need 7. Oh, yeah.
It's no coincidence both exits of this theater lead directly past the casino doors. The temptation of easy money echoes from the occasional outburst of a lucky winner.
6 odd, winner front page, head line, winner, winner, winner.
First night we walked in with $40, sat at the craps table, walked away with $255. Next night we threw away another $60, but still had a good time.
As for the unfortunate majority who will leave their cash behind, cruise officials say their casinos are not as heartless as they could be.
The cruise industry sells a vacation experience. We can't go out there looking to maximize the amount of money you take out of people without understanding that money or loss of money is going to destroy their vacation experience.
All right, well, that's pretty good.
Well, I'm Rohan. I'm the one who will be taking care of your room. I maintain the room twice a day. Coming in morning and...
As with any resort, cruise ships are staffed with attendants eager to cater to your every need.
You pay for the food, or you pay for the tip? Or...
Well, you don't pay for food on board, just tip up to you.
Okay.
All right.
And showing your appreciation with a gratuity is another expense that isn't included.
You will be expected to tip your cabin steward, your dining room waiter, and your busboy before you get off the ship. If the service was really good, you can tip more than the recommended amount. If it was not good, don't feel obligated to pay the recommended amount. But you will be expected to tip something.
That something averages about $3 per server per day. Gym and spa facilities are likely to pump up your bill as well as your body. Although cruise lines continue to trumpet free aerobics classes and gym access, the number of free classes is decreasing. Taking their places are expensive spa treatments.
Hi there. Will you be setting up your account with a credit card?
What's not included included are the beauty treatments, the facials and the massages and the foot massages and the counseling, seminars in manicures or seminars in facials or something, again, to try to increase that onboard revenue.
Looking good at sea is considerably costlier than it is on land. A pedicure here can set you back $45, twice the price off-board.
And are you settling your account with a credit card? Yeah.
Once cruisers hit dry land, the money really starts flowing. A one-day excursion in port can cost more than $90, and those with a weakness for souvenirs spend considerably more. In fact, these expensive odds and ends can tack on $500 to $600 a week to a cruise vacation, or more depending on how much alcohol a passenger consumes. All beverages, cocktails, wine, even sodas cost extra. So is it any wonder most passengers go hog wild when it counts most? At mealtime.
Passengers would board the ship, and some of them, you know, said, well, I'm going to spend $1,000 on the cruise. I'm going to eat $1,000 worth of food.
Yummy, yummy.
Each day, 2,000 passengers consume a half-ton of both bananas and ice cream, nearly 4,000 muffins, and more than 800 pounds of shellfish.
You get one, I get one, so share one.
You've got morning snacks and bouillon, you've got afternoon tea, you've got the midnight buffet, you've got 24-hour room service, and now the companies are doing 24-hour salad bars and pizzerias. So you really can eat yourself into this most wonderful, blissful state, if you will.
Oh, great, great. Thank you.
I gained 10 pounds. And I always say every year I'm not going to do this again.
The food is the reason that I climb stairs all the time and I never take an elevator, because I would be as big as a house.
Working out is just one of the dozens of recreational activities available on most ships. To keep track of them all, ships print out a daily newsletter listing a schedule of events. The Patter is the source of daily news on board the Grand Princess.
Every day I read the Patter. I love it. Lets you know the next day, you know, what you can do. You can plan it out, or you can just play it by ear.
Sometimes it's hard to know if you're at sea or at the world's biggest floating variety show.
They had a great comedian. They had a country singer singing last night. That was great. A hypnotist tonight.
We came with a dancing group, so we've danced a lot. We danced before dinner. We dance after dinner. We dance between the shows. We dance after the shows. Lots of good places with good music.
What these carefree passengers heading ashore don't know is that just off the gangway lies a potential mob scene made up of thousands of other tourists who are also just off the boat, credit cards in hand.
It's not uncommon to be in a particular port with 5 or 6 or 7 other ships, each carrying, 1,500 to 2,000 passengers, trying to do the same thing at once. So my inside tip is do your shopping, in the afternoon, take your tours in the morning.
Crowded shops are a mere inconvenience compared to the trouble a pickpocket can cause, so a few precautions are recommended.
Make photocopies of your credit cards and your passport in case they are lost or stolen. When you go ashore, don't take a lot of cash. Consider taking traveler's checks. If you have, say, 2 credit cards, leave one on the ship. Take only one with you if you're going to do shopping, so that if your purse is snatched, you still have another credit card back on the ship.
Of course, there's no guarantee life on board will be crime-free, but being in a contained area does have its advantages.
I mean, think about it. You're on a ship in the middle of the water. Where is somebody going to go?
Security starts at check-in, which is identical to what passengers go through at any major airport.
They take your luggage and they scan it, prior to boarding. You'll walk through a metal detector and they will check you to make sure you're not bringing on, anything that you shouldn't be bringing on. And they do check not only the passengers, but they check the crew just as well.
When you go on board, you are given an identification card, and then at every port you have to show your ID card, plus most ships require some sort of photo ID in addition to your cruise card. They check to be sure that anybody who gets aboard that ship is either a passenger or a crew member.
How many times do we show this card? Is this the last one?
Screening may keep dangerous strangers off the ship, but it can't prevent other passengers or crew members from violating the law.
There have been some instances of sexual assault and rape aboard cruise ships, but very few.
I can't really say they're increasing or decreasing, but they're probably being kept under tight wraps because we don't hear very much about it. Not just necessarily from the public relations side or the office, but from the staff themselves. It's kind of verboten. It's not talked about. It's not mentioned.
Industry spokesmen point out that the risk of being victimized is no greater at sea than it is at a land resort. But in the middle of the ocean, where jurisdiction is questionable, a crew member who commits a crime may not even be prosecuted.
They just want to get rid of him, and so they put him off at the next port of call and send him home. Now, I guess the good news is he's not going to be on the ship anymore, but the bad news is that, I mean, justice should be done.
Then there's the matter of life and death situations.
Only if it is necessary to abandon ship will you be taken to embark in the lifeboats and life rafts.
On today's cruise ships, you have to have a lifeboat drill within 24 hours of embarkation. And yes, there are enough lifeboats for every passenger and enough life jackets, which there weren't on the Titanic.
Check that there is nothing in the water below you. Look straight ahead and step off. Do not jump.
24 hours after boarding, mandatory emergency drills are held in what are called muster stations.
Here, I got some people hiding in the corner over here. Are you all at lifeboat number 4?
If a real crisis occurs, the muster station is where passengers receive instructions and, if necessary, board lifeboats.
After the lifeboat drill, a couple of times during the cruise, practice getting to your muster station from different places aboard the ship.
In the event of a medical emergency, the ship's doctors can provide stabilizing medical care until a patient can be airlifted to land. The most cutting edge of these facilities can offer long-distance diagnosis.
Doctors on board can actually speak to, through video conferencing, doctors at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles and be apprised of the latest techniques if the doctor on board isn't a specialist in that area.
So if we were actually busy with the patient, they can actually control the camera and see what they want to see.
If a passenger doesn't survive, cruise ships are prepared to handle that situation as well.
A lot of cruise ships travel with a certain number of coffins aboard, and if you should expire at sea, you are put in the coffin and then you're sent home.
But despite thinner wallets, larger waistlines, and occasional troubles, passengers keep enjoying all that these amazing ships have to offer. While travel on the open seas is nearly as ancient as man himself, the luxury of sailing for pleasure spans only a little more than a century.
In 1867, a German ship called the Quaker City set off on a 6-month voyage from New York to the Holy Land with many ports en route, and this was to be a religious enrichment voyage, and among the passengers was one Mr. Mark Twain, who observed firsthand what it was like to be with a group of people who were stopping off in these foreign, exotic places, picking up all sorts of souvenirs and costumes and little hats and headdresses and whatever, and eventually he wrote The Innocents Abroad based upon that voyage.
By the early 1900s, the wealthy had started to discover the pleasures of long voyages at sea. These patrons traveled in high style with luxurious accommodations, while poor immigrants were confined to the cramped steerage areas below deck.
Back at the turn of the century, ships were called ocean liners or passenger ships. They weren't called cruise ships. They moved people from A to B, from one continent to another, from the old world to the new.
But for rich and poor alike, the journey across the Atlantic was long and rough. Ships were unstable and at the mercy of the weather. Then in 1907, innovations in engine design revolutionized the ocean liner.
They were huge 4-stacked liners called the Mauretania and the Lusitania, and they were the first use of an efficient system called steam turbine engines.
Cunard's Mauretania and Lusitania cut travel time across the Atlantic from more than 10 days to 4.5. The new engines also increased the ship's stability, making the voyage quieter and smoother. And there were other changes as well, which had little to do with technology.
Marble tubs in first-class cabins. A lovely winter garden which gave you the chance to sort of sit in a foliage-filled room while you're crossing the North Atlantic, which could be gray and dreary. Lovely salons, glass skylights, beautiful wood. They were really floating palaces of their time. They were castles at sea.
While the Lusitania and Mauretania charmed cruisers with speed, efficiency, and luxury, there was still room for improvement. The ship's designs did not allow for large public areas on deck. In an expensive game of one-upsmanship, Cunard's chief rival, the White Star Line, launched the Olympic and the Titanic.
The White Star strategy was to have very fine, very reputable ships, very comfortable ships.
Opulence compensated for slower speeds, and for the first time in cruising's history, the grandeur of the ship was as much a part of the voyage as was the final destination.
The Olympic was 46,000 tons, which would be about 4 city blocks long. And remember, in 1911, that's impressive stuff.
The Olympic was quickly eclipsed by her sister ship, the Titanic, then the largest movable object ever built. Though the two liners were remarkably similar, the White Star Line was determined to sell the Titanic as something more extraordinary.
White Star Line needed to give that ship a certain claim to fame. And the shipyard said that we have incorporated some new techniques of safety that makes this ship practically unsinkable. And the White Star Line thought, practically unsinkable. So they took a pencil and crossed out practically and said it was unsinkable. And to prove the point, there was not enough life-saving gear on board beyond all the passengers and crew that would be needed.
That incredible arrogance led to a disaster that's unparalleled in cruising history.
The Titanic rammed an iceberg a little after 11 on the night of April 14th, 1912. She was ripped open and began to flood, and in about 3 hours sank, going down by the bow. 1,500 plus perished, 705 survived, 32% lived of all those on board.
Despite the sinking of the Titanic, ocean liners continued to thrive until the end of World War I. In 1920, new U.S. laws curtailed the flow of immigrants cruise lines had relied on to keep ships sailing at full capacity.
Companies had to create tourist class, comfortable accommodations, inexpensive, for school teachers and college students on a budget who wanted to go to Europe.
With cabins virtually empty and revenues at all-time lows, cruise lines came up with a clever scheme to stay afloat. At the height of Prohibition, ships offered a path that led straight to a flowing bar.
They called them booze cruises because we had Prohibition, but a foreign liner, once it got outside of the New York limits, could open up its bars, and Americans could legally drink into the wee hours. And this, at the same time, allowed companies to earn some profits and to keep the ships sailing, because the European trade had dropped enormously, from 1 million travelers to Europe in 1930 to 500,000 in 1935.
At such a time, mere living is a delight. And, as Walt Whitman says, you may truly loaf and invite your soul.
The end of World War II brought another boom in tourism. Cruise lines capitalized on the public's increased leisure time and renewed interest in foreign destinations. The good times lasted until the late 50s.
The arrival of the first jet crossing in October '58 was devastating. Cunard said the next day that flying is a fad. People will always sail to Europe by ship. Within 6 months, the airlines had 2/3 of the business, and by the 60s, they had 95%. And suddenly, the big liners were practically empty sailing to Europe.
The introduction of the Boeing 707 nearly wiped out the cruise industry altogether. But desperation and innovation pushed industry leaders to carve out a new cruising niche. Ships were reconfigured for weekend excursions and booked with younger, more affluent travelers in search of a quick getaway.
You just went for the fun of it, the recreation, and instead came the generation of white cruise ships, floating resorts, hotels that move, saunas, discotheques, big Lido decks, swimming pools, jacuzzis, solariums, even rollerblading tracks coming up. These are the ships of today.
There's a total of 4 lovely beaches surrounding us in this bay here. You can see 2 very nice reefs just off the beach. There's some absolutely beautiful snorkeling.
Although cruising is at its peak of popularity, only 6% of Americans have ever taken a cruise. So there's an all-out battle to entice the remaining masses to try out their sea legs. One way to do so is with theme cruises, customized voyages that fit specific consumer interests.
And this gentleman... If you tighten the mast too tight, it flattens the seal out like that. It's going to cause us to leak on the side.
There's been theme cruises that have wooed people over onto their first trip. Consequently, they get hooked and they go on more cruises and more cruises.
5, 6, 7, 8.
And the variety is endless.
5, 6, 7, 8.
How to Write a Murder Mystery Cruise, Better Gardening Cruise, the Hollywood Nostalgia Cruise, the Give Up Smoking Cruise. I've even been on the How to Make Out Your Last Will and Testament Cruise, where they gave advice as what to do with your loot before you went to the great ship in the sky.
Adventure cruises are another way to go.
We took a Soviet nuclear-powered icebreaker across Siberia from Alaska over to Murmansk. We took a 3-week cruise up the Yangtze River. We've been all the way up the Amazon on a small boat.
Adventure cruises shift priority away from the ship, luring passengers with exotic outings and far-ranging ports. One of the most popular adventure destinations is Alaska.
You really get a more up-close, personal view of Alaska. You can go up little fjords, you can go kayaking with killer whales, or you may see killer whales not even that far off the bow of the ship. There are lots of ecological cruises, nature cruises, where you go out in little rubber boats and you go observe the wildlife, observe the birds.
Adventure seekers daunted by big ticket prices might consider cruising by freighter, which can cost as little as $75 a day.
You can actually book space on a freighter, a real freighter that just carries freight around the world.
Flexibility is the key when traveling by freighter. If the cargo isn't loaded on time, the ship stays in port until it is. Itineraries change constantly.
These are for people who, as they used to say, have more time than money. They can go, and if the voyage takes 3 months and not 2 months because the cargo determines it, that's the way they travel.
This is the bar, obviously. It's self-service.
Traveling by freighter is definitely slower paced, and the accommodations are downright homey.
We have people that paint, and the lady who brought her sewing machine on board, she said she never had time to make drapes. So she made her drapes on board, and she patched the clothes of all the officers and crew. So they were very sorry to see her leave.
Other freighter fans do as little as possible.
Read and walk and just relax, take it easy. We're not really into the activity, organized activity type of a cruise. We've been on one short one, and it really didn't appeal to us, so we thought we'd try this.
Traveling by sea in whatever style you want is clearly the cruising industry's strongest selling point. The uniqueness of each travel experience can be much more than a vacation. For some, it's an addiction.
The cruise that we're leaving on shortly will be our 19th world cruise. Guatemala City in 67.
James Caton and his wife Lucille have spent a total of 4 years at sea since their first cruise 30 years ago. In that time, they've been to nearly 200 countries.
Unfortunately, we've run out of places to go. People say, "Where are you going?" I say, "Well, we're taking a round-the-world cruise, but we're looking for another place."
For the Catons, each journey is really like coming back home.
Jeff, well, the staff and crew, of course, we've known for some of them for over 20 years. I've watched them grow up. One young man was just a boy waiter in the ship, and now he has one of the top positions at Crystal. They're friends. They're no longer acquaintances.
If you'll stand next to the captain.
For those who love cruising, it can truly be the only way to see the world.
I have taken approximately 250 cruises on probably 200 different ships. And I've been very fortunate to get to go all around the world, India, Australia, Africa, the Mediterranean, the Amazon, whatever. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful second life, if you will.
From double-decker pools to double-digit jumps in local economies, the incoming wave of superliners is sure to please everyone from shopkeeper to sunbather in their quest for fun, freedom, and the ultimate in luxury travel in the secret world of cruise ships.